Are you ready for a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat? Brace yourself for the tale of Sarah Whitlock, the seemingly ordinary widow who single-handedly faces down a ruthless biker gang, only for them to discover that she's actually a highly trained Delta Force operative. From the nail-biting moment she takes her first precise shot to the explosive standoff that lights up the Nebraskan night sky, this story is loaded with twists and turns you won't see coming. Want to find out how one lone woman protects her entire homestead against overwhelming odds? Then stick around, because the heart-pounding confrontation and its unforgettable conclusion are well worth every second of suspense. If you love thrilling action and stories of unbreakable spirit, make sure to subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll never miss another gripping story and can join a community that appreciates the same pulse-racing adventures you do. Sarah Whitlock rose before dawn on her secluded ranch nestled at the edge of the expansive Nebraskan plains. She found a certain comfort in the solitude, coyotes yapping in the distance, a gentle breeze stirring the wheat fields, and the crimson glow of first light illuminating her modest farmhouse. To anyone passing by, she was merely a widow living alone, dutifully tending her crop and raising a few chickens and goats to make ends meet. The house still bore signs of her late husband's handiwork: a sturdy wraparound porch, hand-carved shutters, and a weathered barn that spoke of years of shared labor and quiet love. From the outside, it was a scene as ordinary as any slice of rural Americana. Yet beneath that unassuming exterior lay an extraordinary secret. Long before she'd taken on her husband's last name and settled into a life of peaceful domesticity, Sarah had served in the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force. Over the years, her call sign, Shadow Swan, had earned hushed reverence among her peers. She was known for her lethal precision and fearless nerve. However, her past was buried under layers of dusty memories, locked away in a trunk in the attic. Boxes of old uniforms, carefully folded medals, and a single battered photograph of her holding a rifle in front of a windswept Afghan outpost were the only testaments to the soldier she once was. There was an unspoken reason why the townsfolk rarely saw her venturing beyond the local feed store. She carried the weight of unspeakable losses. Her husband's death in a freak ranch accident had left a chasm in her heart, driving her further into seclusion. Grief acted as a fortress, an emotional barrier that kept her from forging new ties or reopening old connections. Only the faint lines on her brow and the distant sadness in her eyes hinted that she'd seen more tragedy than most. On the rare occasions that neighbors came by to offer help, Sarah politely declined with a soft smile, thanking them while insisting she was managing just fine. Her daily life had become a study in quiet resilience, rising early to tend the fields, patching fences, and collecting eggs from her small coop. When the day's chores ended, she'd retreat to the barn loft or the porch swing to watch the sun set over fields of grain, painting the horizon gold and maroon. In those solitary hours, she sometimes let her mind drift back to the years spent in covert operations. Desert raids, nighttime recon missions, the adrenaline-pumping chaos of battle. She reflected on them less with pride and more with an odd detachment, as though the woman in those memories was someone else entirely. That stillness would have continued indefinitely, her carefully constructed rural fortress left unbreached, had it not been for the rumors drifting through the county. Whispers of a biker gang expanding its territory reached even her remote outpost. Ranchers found their cattle missing, shops in the nearby town reported theft and extortion, and local authorities seemed unwilling or unprepared to confront the growing menace. Sarah kept her distance from gossip, but a faint tremor of unease began to ripple across her quiet homestead. It would not be long before fate forced her out of the shadows, compelling her to become the fierce operative she had once been. Paragraph 2, approx 500 words. The night sky was clear, studded with stars that glimmered like distant lanterns above the rolling plains. Inside her dimly lit living room, Sarah sat at a worn mahogany desk, penning a short letter to her late husband's brother in Arizona. She rarely wrote, but something in her bones warned her that trouble was closing in, and she felt the need to reconnect with distant family. Her mind wandered as she scribbled the words onto yellowed stationery, thinking of the good times, the laughter at holiday gatherings, and the warmth of a family bond she had willfully neglected since her husband's passing. Suddenly, her aging border collie Duke lifted his head from where he dozed by the front door and let out a low growl. The small lamp on the desk flickered as if stirred by the tension now simmering in the air. Sarah set her pen down gently, her pulse quickening. Duke was never one to growl. At passing wildlife, coyotes came and went without disturbing him, and he'd grown used to the occasional raccoons scurrying across the porch. This was different. Rising to her feet, She felt a primal alertness coursing through her body, an echo of the instincts she'd honed in countless missions. She moved toward the window, drawing back a curtain just an inch. At first, she saw nothing unusual, only the vast darkness surrounding the farmhouse. However, the faint rumble of motorcycle engines soon found its way to her ears, barely audible over the soft chirping of crickets. The sound drew closer, its pitch rising like the distant drone of approaching hornets. It wasn't the heavy traffic of the main road, no. These riders were heading for her property, specifically their headlights now visible through the thin line of trees marking the farm's perimeter. An unsettling knot coiled in Sarah's stomach. The local news had been rife with stories of a vicious biker gang known as the Iron Vultures. They'd started as petty thieves and troublemakers, but had escalated to brazen robberies and intimidation tactics. Townspeople whispered about violent confrontations and disappeared livestock, about threats carved into barn doors as warnings for those who didn't comply with their demands. If they were coming here, it couldn't be for anything good. With silent efficiency, she flicked off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The house, like its owner, was a testament to function over flair. She knew every squeaky floorboard, every safe nook to stand in while surveying the area outside. Her hands crept toward a concealed compartment under the kitchen sink, one that housed a small arsenal she kept just in case. A holdover from her Delta Force days, the secret stash included a handgun, a compact rifle, and ammunition carefully wrapped in plastic. She hesitated. Old habits warred with her desire to maintain a peaceful life, but the roar of those motorcycle engines creeping across her property line left no illusions. Danger was here, and it demanded a response. As she crouched in the silent darkness, Duke at her side, Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of the old adrenaline. The quiet widow veneer was already starting to peel away, revealing glimpses of the soldier beneath the one who could dismantle an enemy position with cold precision. She shut her eyes for a second, inhaling deeply to steady her nerves. She was ready. Paragraph 3, approx 500 words. A half-moon illuminated the silhouettes of several motorcycles rolling into the open space in front of her farmhouse. Sarah caught the shapes of 5, maybe 6 men, all of them cutting their engines with practiced ease. The bikes glinted menacingly in the moonlight, low-slung frames, custom exhausts, and menacing skull decals that hinted at violence. Distant echoes of bullfrogs and nightbirds filled the hush that followed, as though nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. From her vantage point behind the curtain, Sarah observed the intruders dismount. The ringleader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, gestured curtly to his companions. Each carried something that glinted metallic in the moonlight, crowbars perhaps, or tire irons. Their posture exuded the casual arrogance of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. No questions asked, without making a sound, Sarah slipped away from the window and moved into the hallway. Her breathing was controlled, each step deliberate. She grabbed a small earpiece from a drawer and swiftly inserted it. Though her days of advanced tactical gear were long gone, she still had a few modern gadgets stashed around the house. With a flick of a switch, she activated a series of small security cameras she had installed over the years. Another skill carried over from her covert past. 4 monitors in her bedroom closet flickered to life, each displaying a different angle of the property: the gravel driveway, the porch steps, the barn door, and the rear field. Peering at the screens, she watched the bikers spread out. One tested the front door's handle while another peered through the windows, presumably looking for signs of occupancy. They clearly thought they had the upper hand, and after all, who would expect trouble from an isolated widow living in a quiet farmhouse? Sarah suppressed a wry smile. She would give them credit for their boldness, if nothing else. Her mind raced with possibilities. Should she confront them directly? Should she let them break something to gauge their real intentions? A younger version of herself, the fresh Delta recruit who once excelled at decisive takedowns, would have already been outside, weapon drawn, employing textbook maneuvers to neutralize the threat. But the older, wiser Sarah recognized the importance of intelligence gathering. These bikers could just be scouting, or they could be the front line of a larger assault. Either way, she needed to know. Sliding her rifle from its hidden recess, she carefully checked the magazine before chambering a round. A wave of memory washed over her, the feel of the cold metal, the satisfying click of a well-maintained weapon, the subtle shift of focus that accompanied imminent conflict. She was preparing for a mission, just like old times. Only now, the battlefield was her home, and the stakes were her very life. With silent steps, she climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, positioning herself behind a window that overlooked the front yard. She steadied the rifle on the sill, adjusting her line of sight. Down below, the tall ringleader barked an order she couldn't quite hear, but the tone alone spelled trouble. Sarah inhaled, her finger resting lightly along the rifle's trigger guard. She was determined not to fire first, but if these intruders made a hostile move, she would not hesitate. That time. Paragraph 4, approx 500 words. Below, the men split off into small pairs, evidently searching for an entry point. One stepped onto the porch, boots thudding ominously against the worn boards. Another circled toward the back, shining a flashlight into windows. The leader stood in the yard, scanning the darkness with a confident sneer, as if he was certain the property's owner was either asleep or too frightened to appear. Hidden in the second-floor shadows, Sarah's mind flickered to her training. In Delta Force, she'd been taught to constantly calculate threat levels, to parse every angle for advantage. The porch vantage was easily covered from her current position. The man exploring near the barn was out of her direct line of fire, but the cameras inside would keep track of him for the time being. The real question was whether they intended to destroy property, harm livestock, or if they sought something more sinister. With a slow exhale, she reminded herself of the old protocols: gathered intel, maintain stealth, and neutralize threats only when absolutely necessary. She let her gaze drift momentarily to a photo in the hallway, her and her husband standing by a row of hay bales on a warm summer afternoon. The memory almost made her smile. He'd fallen in love with her gentle side, never prying too deep into the soldier she used to be. But fate had left her alone, and now it seemed the only companion she had was the lethal skill set she once hoped she'd never need again. A sudden crash broke the silence. The biker on the porch had swung his crowbar at the front door, splintering the frame. Even from her vantage point, Sarah could see the door jolt in its hinges. The intimidation tactic was unmistakable. The men obviously believed no one inside would dare to retaliate. A wave of anger surged in her chest. This was her home, her sanctuary, and they were violating it. Yet her mind remained calm, a testament to years of conditioning. She repositioned the rifle, aligning the iron sights with the broad back of the man at the door. Her finger hovered near the trigger, her body tensing, ready to fire if he took the next step. Then she heard a different noise, a metallic clank from the barn area. She glanced at the camera feed on her phone, which she'd clipped to a strap on her vest. The tall leader and another biker were trying to break into the barn, perhaps drawn by the notion of valuable tools or equipment. Inside, indecision flickered across Sarah's brow. The front door was under direct threat, but letting them tamper with the barn meant risking her livestock and a part of the property that was sentimental, full of her late husband's relics. She bit her lip, weighing the tactical cost. Eventually, her sense of timing won out. She had to act now while they were still spread thin. If she waited too long, they might regroup and become a more coordinated threat. Taking a measured breath, she eased her finger onto the trigger, watching the man by the door. He raised his crowbar again, presumably to finish off the lock. That was it. He had passed the line of idle threat. In a single heartbeat, Sarah squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack split the night air, and the crowbar-wielding biker dropped to the porch like a sack of grain, writhing in pain from a shot clean through his shoulder. The quiet widow was no longer a timid bystander. She had just declared war. Paragraph 5, approx 500 words. The abrupt gunshot echoed across the fields, sending the roosting crows into a cacophony of startled cries. For a split second, the remaining bikers froze in shock, clearly not expecting armed resistance. The one on the porch writhed, clutching his bleeding shoulder, howling curses at the top of his lungs. If they had harbored any notions of an easy raid, Sarah's single shot shattered that illusion. Sarah knew she had mere moments before the rest of the gang reacted. Sliding back from the window, she paced to the stairwell with swift, calculated steps. Adrenaline coursed through her, but her training kept her mind razor-sharp. She descended to the ground floor, rifle at the ready, while Duke followed close on her heels. The dog's ears were pinned back, his muscles tense. He too sensed that this was no ordinary intruder scenario. Crashing noises erupted from the rear of the house as a second biker apparently decided to break in through a back window. Sarah heard glass shattering, followed by a thud, as someone clambered inside. She positioned herself behind the living room doorway, the muzzle of her rifle trained on the hallway leading from the kitchen to the back rooms. Every sense was on high alert, the smell of gunpowder still lingering near the front door, the crunch of broken glass under heavy boots, and the ragged gasp of the wounded man outside. A dark silhouette emerged in the dim light, momentarily outlined by moonlight filtering through the broken window. The intruder paused, likely adjusting to the gloom. Without hesitating, Sarah fired a single warning shot into the floorboards. the sharp splintering of wood halting him in his tracks. "Get out," she commanded in a voice that brooked no argument. She kept the rifle steady, finger poised to fire again if he made one wrong move. For a second, the biker held his ground, clutching a flashlight that cast an erratic beam around the walls. Maybe he thought her voice was bluster that she wouldn't actually take him down. Then, as if sensing the lethal intent behind her words, he slowly stepped back, stumbling over the broken window frame to retreat. Outside voices rose in chaotic confusion as the rest of the gang realized they'd walked into a hornet's nest. Sarah took a mental inventory. The front door was compromised. A man lay injured on the porch, and at least one intruder had tried and failed to breach the back. She didn't know how many were still standing, but from the camera feeds she'd counted at least 6. She also knew the leader hadn't yet shown himself. An uneasy feeling crept through her. This kind of gang rarely stopped at the first sign of resistance. They tended to respond with overwhelming force to preserve their reputation. Quickly, she decided on the next move. The barn where she'd seen the tall ringleader earlier was out of her immediate line of sight. She needed to regain the high ground. If they set the barn on fire or vandalized it, they could trap her in the house or compromise her escape routes. Gritting her teeth, she slipped back into the hallway, heading for the stairs once more. If they wanted a fight, she would ensure it was on her terms, leveraging every vantage and every weapon at her disposal. Paragraph 6. Prox 500 words. With her rifle slung over her shoulder, Sarah paused by a hidden alcove under the staircase to grab additional ammunition. The old wooden steps creaked softly underfoot, as she ascended to the second floor again. This time, her intention was to move to the attic, a space she rarely visited, but had equipped with a vantage point for precisely these sorts of emergencies. Reaching the attic door, she pulled down the creaky ladder. Duke whined, reluctant to climb the narrow steps. "Stay," she commanded softly, and the dog obediently settled at the top of the second-floor landing, alert to any movement below. Sarah disappeared into the attic's dusty confines, the air thick with memories of her past, cobweb crates and sealed trunks that held her old uniforms, discharged papers, and carefully folded American flags. She made her way to a small dormer window that she'd secretly modified. Unlike the other windows in the house, this one had a reinforced glass pane and could swing open silently. Easing it open, Sarah positioned herself to get a clearer view of the barn and the yard below. The night was still, except for the distant moans of the wounded biker and the muffled shouts of his companions planning their next move. Peering through a night vision scope she'd retrieved from one of the attic trunks, she located the tall leader near the barn doors. He was conferring with another thug, their posture agitated. Behind them, a silhouette stood watch, clutching what looked like a shotgun. Sarah counted 4 upright figures, excluding the one groaning on her porch. That meant at least 5 men were still a factor, potentially more if reinforcements were on the way. A flicker of movement caught her attention. One of the bikers was attempting to siphon gas from a canister near the side of the barn. Her breath caught in her throat. They might be planning to set the place ablaze, a common intimidation tactic among gangs to force compliance. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained cool under pressure. If they torched the barn, they could trap her inside the house or at least cut off her resources. She needed to neutralize that threat first. Steadying the rifle on the windowsill, she focused on the man handling the gas can. Through the scope, she could see his every movement. Her finger gently touched the trigger, but she hesitated. A lethal shot would be justified if he actively tried to ignite the barn. Still, part of her hesitated to escalate to lethal force. Her shot at the biker on the porch had been precise enough to wound, not kill. That alone showed she was willing to fight, but preferred not to take lives if it could be avoided. Suddenly, the man struck a match. Flames flared briefly, illuminating his face in an orange glow. He was too close to the barn, and if she didn't act, he'd set the whole structure ablaze. Exhaling slowly, Sarah squeezed the trigger. A crack rang out. Sparks flew as the match dropped to the ground, snuffed out by the man's involuntary jerk. She'd hit his hand, disarming him and sending him sprawling. He let out a yelp of pain, dropping the gas can. Chaos erupted below. Shouts rose, muffled curses filled the air, and 2 of the bikers scrambled to drag their wounded comrade to safety. Through her scope, Sarah saw the tall leader spin in her direction, scanning the rooftop as if finally realizing that this was more than just a random homeowner firing wildly. She recognized the look on his face. He knew he was dealing with a professional. Paragraph 7, approx 500 words. For a moment, the night was eerily still, punctuated only by the labored breathing of the injured men and the rustle of tall grass around the yard. Sarah held her position, scanning for any signs that more bikers might be lurking. Her mind flicked through strategic options. Hold the attic vantage, move to the barn for a surprise attack, or slip out through the fields to outflank them. The Delta Force training demanded adaptability, and she was grateful for the drummed-in discipline that kept her from letting fear dictate her actions. She watched as the tall leader crouched beside the wounded man near the barn, muttering something to the others. Though she couldn't hear the words, the tension in his posture made his intentions clear. This was about to escalate. Sarah had effectively shown them that stepping onto her property wasn't just a petty crime, it was an invitation to a war they hadn't expected. The man's expression hardened as he rose to his full height, pointing toward the house. A moment later, two of his lackeys broke away, moving in a wide arc around the barn to approach from the side. Recognizing a flanking maneuver, Sarah knew it was time to shift position. Staying in the attic would leave her vulnerable if they reached the house's blind spots. She secured her rifle, then eased herself back down the creaky ladder, quietly closing the attic door behind her. Duke met her gaze with watchful eyes. She patted his head reassuringly, then headed into a small bedroom that overlooked the side yard. Peering out through the window, she spotted the two bikers creeping along the fence line. They moved cautiously, scanning for any sign of her. One carried a sawn-off shotgun, the other wielded a long-barreled revolver. They're spooked, she thought, noting their body language, tense, scanning every shadow. She considered letting them come closer, but realized the time for subtlety was slipping away. The more confident they grew, the more likely they'd coordinate a full assault. She whispered a command to Duke, who obediently trotted toward the stairs, prepared to guard the lower level. The dog's loyalty touched her, reminding her that she wasn't entirely alone in this confrontation. Then she shouldered her rifle again, lining up a shot on the man with the shotgun. He was about 50 yards from the house, inching closer with each step, before she could pull the trigger. However, the leader suddenly appeared from behind the barn, holding what looked like a handheld radio to his mouth. Her stomach clenched. A radio could mean reinforcements, if he was calling in more of the Iron Vultures. The situation could spin out of control fast. She had to disrupt their communication. Taking careful aim, she fired at the radio, hoping to destroy it. The bullet shattered the device, sending shards of plastic flying. The tall leader swore loudly, dropping the useless hunk of metal and glaring up at the house with raw hatred. That act sealed it. Negotiations were impossible now. She'd prevented him from calling for backup, effectively painting a target on her own back. She had to prepare for a final standoff, one that might happen within minutes. Her mind kicked into overdrive, planning each step secure. The interior funneled them into choke points and maintained the upper hand. She moved swiftly through the hallway, checking windows and latching doors, turning the old farmhouse into a defensive stronghold. Paragraph 8, approx 500 words. The farmhouse itself, built a century ago, seemed an unlikely fortress. Yet Sarah's modifications over the years reinforced doors, hidden compartments, and tactical vantage points transformed it into a bastion of survival. Each step she took as she crossed the creaking floors was accompanied by the hum of her heightened awareness. A faint moan drifted in through the broken front door, reminding her that at least one biker remained incapacitated on the porch. She couldn't tell if he was still armed or if his fellow outlaws had dragged him to safety. What mattered more was the pair circling the yard, plus the tall leader, who was growing more enraged by the second. She glanced at a small digital clock on the wall. It was barely past midnight, but the night felt endless. Her immediate plan was to drive them away or incapacitate them before they could gather reinforcements. Sprinting to the kitchen, she carefully pulled back the curtain and scanned the area. The silhouettes were gone. The yard appeared empty. That made them more dangerous. The Iron Vultures had either retreated temporarily to regroup, or they were stealthily maneuvering around the back. Either way, she couldn't afford to wait passively. She opened the cellar door and slipped downstairs, flicking on a red-tinted flashlight that wouldn't interfere with her night vision. The cellar was damp, filled with crates of old supplies and sacks of seed, but it led to a concealed exit, an old storm hatch that opened into a trench behind the house. Sarah unlatched it, pausing to listen for footsteps above. Hearing nothing, she pushed it open, just enough to slip outside, crouched low in the tall grass behind the farmhouse. She took a moment to orient herself. The cool night air brushed against her cheeks, and the distant hum of crickets filled her ears. She scanned the perimeter. No immediate signs of movement. Carefully, she skirted the side of the house, angling toward the barn where she'd last seen the leader. Halfway there, she spotted a figure skulking among the shadows near a wagon that had been left by the sidewall. It was the second man from the flanking team, the one with the revolver. He was crouched low, possibly trying to catch a glimpse through the barn window. Sarah steadied her breathing. She inched closer, rifle at the ready. If she could take him out quietly, it would reduce the gang's numbers further without drawing attention. He turned suddenly, likely sensing her presence. Their eyes locked in the moonlight, his widening in surprise as he realized who he faced. Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon. Neither of them fired immediately. He seemed stunned that this lone widow was out in the open, moving with a seasoned soldier's stealth. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. Then she lunged forward, slamming the stock of her rifle into his wrist. The revolver clattered to the ground. He tried to grab for her, but she twisted away, hooking her leg behind his knee to sweep him off balance. He toppled with a grunt, sprawling in the dirt. In one fluid motion, she pressed the muzzle of her rifle to his chest, her voice ice cold. "Stay down," she hissed, her eyes blazing with the authority of someone who'd seen far worse than a midnight brawl in a farmyard. Paragraph 9, approx 500 words. A mixture of fear and bewilderment flickered across the biker's face. He lifted trembling hands in surrender, eyes darting wildly as if hoping his companions would rescue him. Sarah could hear distant cursing from the porch area and guessed the tall leader was probably rallying the others for one final assault. She had no time to waste on negotiations or leniency. Still pressing her rifle against the man's torso, she leaned in close. "Who sent you?" she demanded in a low, furious whisper. He swallowed hard, licking his lips. "We don't know you," he stammered, voice thick with desperation. "Leader just said we had to scare the local ranchers, get them to sell or pay up," Sarah narrowed her eyes. "And you think that involves breaking into private homes, setting barns on fire?" He nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm just following orders, lady. We didn't expect." He broke off his sentence, morphing into a gasp of pain as she applied pressure with the rifle barrel. "You've made a big mistake," she said, her tone simmering with righteous anger. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She'd seen countless criminals during her covert operations, but it was different when the fight landed at her front door, threatening everything she held dear. Before she could ask another question, she caught sight of a moving shadow in her peripheral vision. Someone was rounding the barn. Quickly, she delivered a sharp blow to the biker's temple with the butt of her rifle, knocking him unconscious. He slumped to the ground, leaving Sarah free to spin around and refocus her aim. The silhouette belonged to one of the other gang members, an imposing figure brandishing a knife. Upon seeing her, he lunged without hesitation, the blade flashing under the moonlight. Sarah sidestepped, deflecting his arm with a swift block. Her movement was a fluid blend of martial arts techniques she'd honed years ago. The man stumbled, cursing under his breath, and lashed out again. This time she trapped his wrist, twisting it so the knife fell from his grasp. He roared in pain, swinging his free hand in a wild attempt to catch her off guard. She ducked under his clumsy punch and countered with a strike to his solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs in a ragged wheeze as he doubled over. She brought her knee up sharply, connecting with his jaw. He crumpled to the ground, eyes rolled back, panting slightly. Sarah stood over him, scanning the yard. The night was now filled with confused shouting, pained groans, and the sporadic shuffle of boots on dirt. Despite her advantage so far, she sensed the tall leader had yet to make his decisive move, and that unsettled her. He was cunning enough to hang back to let his underlings probe for vulnerabilities while he sized up the threat. Tugging a strip of rope from her vest pocket, she swiftly bound the unconscious man's wrists behind him. She glanced at the farmhouse. Some lights were still on, flickering through shattered windows. Guilt pricked her. Duke was still inside, defending that battered stronghold alone. But she had to finish neutralizing these intruders before they could regroup. Her muscles burned from the exertion, yet she found herself slipping back into the familiar rhythm of combat, her old Delta persona emerging fully for the first time since her discharge. Paragraph 10, approx 500 words. Gunfire erupted near the porch, abrupt and startling. Sarah's pulse quickened. She crouched low, dashing alongside the barn's outer wall to get a better vantage point. Through a gap in the boards, she spied the tall leader standing on the dirt path that led to her front door. He held a pistol in his right hand, smoke curling from the barrel. The wounded biker on the porch had gone silent. Perhaps the leader had lost patience with his own injured comrade. Or maybe he'd fired at the door in frustration. Either way, it was a grim sign of his brutality. A wave of rage sparked inside her. This man had instigated terror on her property, threatened her life and the safety of her home. Yet she forced herself to remain calm. Anger could lead to mistakes, Slowly, methodically, she moved around the barn to approach him from the flank. The tall grass parted softly as she inched closer, every muscle coiled like a predator closing in on its prey. With the farmhouse lights behind him, the leader's silhouette stood out like a target against the pale glow. He barked a string of obscenities, taunting whoever might be listening inside. "You think you're tough? You can shoot my boys. Let's see how you handle me." His voice cut through the night with feral intensity. Sarah exhaled, steadying her breathing. She raised her rifle, lining the crosshairs on the man's torso. A single shot could end this. But something made her hesitate, the part of her that remembered the weight of taking a life, even if it was a villain's. The hesitation lasted barely a second, but it was enough. The leader seemed to sense her presence, pivoting with uncanny speed. His pistol fired, the muzzle flash lighting the gloom. She dropped to the ground, the bullet whizzing overhead, missing by inches. Her heart hammered as she rolled behind the cover of an old water trough. The stench of stale water assaulted her nose, but she stayed silent. Another shot rang out, pinging off the metal trough with a sharp clang. He was firing blindly, trying to flush her out. Gripping her rifle tightly, Sarah waited until she heard a pause in his shots, likely reloading or searching for a better angle. Then she popped up, returning fire in 3 quick bursts. She saw him dive for cover behind a rusted tractor near the porch. So he wasn't just brute force, he had some tactical sense. A standoff ensued. Each of them had cover, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. Wind rustled through the tall grass and the distant howls of coyotes broke the silence. Somewhere in the darkness, the other bikers either lay wounded or unconscious, leaving these two warriors locked in deadly opposition. Sarah felt a grim respect for his resolve, but that didn't change her determination. She let out a slow breath, recalling a tactic from her Delta days. Under the cover of darkness, she unclipped a flashbang grenade from a pouch on her belt, a relic she'd kept as a souvenir. Carefully pulling the pin, she counted 2 seconds and tossed it in an arc toward the tractor. The explosion of light and sound tore through the night, disorienting the leader. She heard him scream, his pistol firing off in random directions, sensing her moment. Sarah bolted from cover. She closed the distance, ignoring the ringing in her own ears. Before he could recover, she struck his arm, forcing his pistol to the ground. He swung a wild punch, but she ducked, landing a precise kick to his knee. He staggered, losing balance. In a final move, she pressed the barrel of her rifle to his chest. Enough, she hissed, her voice low and steady. "I won't say it again." He glared at her, rage and fear battling in his eyes. The pistol lay just out of reach, and none of his men were conscious or brave enough to come to his rescue. Her finger rested on the trigger, breath ragged from exhaustion and adrenaline. For a moment, the entire world narrowed to the two of them, each representing a lifetime of choices that had led to this flashpoint in a quiet Nebraskan farmyard. In the end, Sarah not only outmatches the Iron Vultures, but she also rediscovers her own resilience, a testament to how personal strength and integrity can triumph over fear. Her quiet farm, once threatened by dangerous invaders, returns to its peaceful routine with the promise that those who underestimate her or anyone do so at their peril. Reflecting on her past in the Delta Force, she realizes every trial has shaped her into a guardian, worthy of her land and the memory of her loved ones. From a personal perspective, this outcome highlights the power of courage and resourcefulness in the face of intimidation. With the Outlaws dispatched and Sarah's spirit reborn, the story leaves us with a comforting sense of justice served. Did you enjoy this journey of hidden heroism? Share your thoughts and join the discussion below. We'd love to hear your ideas and impressions on everything from the plot twist to Sarah's final stand.